Breaking news tonight, reports confirm the Crimea bridge has been destroyed in what appears to be a Ukrainian MiG-29 strike. Tensions are escalating rapidly.
August 18th, 2025. Over the Baltic Sea, where NATO and Russian patrols shadow each other every single day, silence suddenly broke. What Moscow believed was a Ukrainian fighter jet had, in fact, been an American F-35, Lightning II, gliding silently on a reconnaissance sweep. At 9:42 a.m., the sky lit up. From deep inside Kaliningrad, a Russian drone operator locked onto the faint radar trace. Believing he was tracking an intruder, he launched a loitering munition, fast, silent, and deadly. In seconds, it streaked toward the F-35, accelerating with a terrifying speed. The pilot's sensors screamed as the threat closed in. He pulled violently into evasive maneuvers, flares bursting behind him. But the drone detonated so close that the shockwave ripped through his wings. The cockpit alarms lit up red. Control was slipping away. Over encrypted comms, his voice came steady but grim. Mayday. Hit over Baltic waters. Attempting ditch.
Mayday. Hit target over the Baltic Sea.
Those words would ripple all the way to Washington. At 9:47 a.m., the stealth jet descended uncontrollably toward the sea. Spray exploded as the aircraft hit the waves, breaking apart on impact. The pilot ejected, but his fate remained unknown. What mattered in that moment was the signal flashing across Pentagon screens. A U.S. aircraft had been struck by Russian firepower. For Moscow, it may have been a tragic miscalculation. For Washington, it looked like something else entirely. An act of war. And within hours, the United States would answer. Not with diplomacy, not with delay, but with overwhelming fire. The question is, was this really a mistake? Or was Russia testing the limits? And could America's response punch through the fortress once considered impenetrable? At 4:15 a.m. Washington time, the encrypted distress call from the downed F-35 rippled through satellites before landing on Pentagon screens. The message was short, chilling, and final. Aircraft hit. Pilot ejecting. Immediate recovery needed. The words were enough to set off alarms at the highest level of government. Within minutes, the secure Situation Room beneath the White House was crowded with America's most powerful decision-makers. The president sat at the head of the table, flanked by the Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and the National Security Advisor. Intelligence analysts shuffled in and out, laying down freshly intercepted data, while aides patched through live feeds from the Baltic. The atmosphere was heavy, the silence broken only by the soft hum of projectors. On the wall, the grainy satellite image of the Baltic Sea flickered. An American jet worth $98 million had gone down, not in a training mishap, but under hostile fire. And the location was unmistakable: Kaliningrad, Russia's most fortified enclave, bristling with S-400 missile batteries and advanced radar. When the intelligence officers spoke, they did so in clipped, careful voices. Radar signatures confirmed the weapon originated inside Russian territory. The odds of a misfire or mistaken launch were slim. Every piece of data pointed in one direction. This was deliberate. The weight of that conclusion pressed down on the room. No one wanted to say the word out loud, but everyone understood what it meant. Russia had fired on the United States. The line that world leaders had danced around for years had just been crossed. For 12 long minutes, discussions swirled, options were laid out. ranging from diplomatic protests to limited military response. But the mood was cold, decisive. Washington wasn't debating if to respond, but how hard. At 4:27 a.m., the president cut through the tension. His voice was steady, measured, but left no room for doubt. Prepare the fleet. Thousands of miles away in the North Atlantic, the USS Gerald R Ford and its strike group received the order. America's most advanced aircraft carrier was already in position, accompanied by guided missile cruisers, destroyers, and over 75 aircraft primed for combat. Below deck, sailors and pilots snapped into motion. Combat crews reviewed flight paths, checked weapons, and fueled aircraft. Operations officers began plotting strike packages with satellite support and electronic warfare cover. The plan that emerged was brutal in its clarity. The first wave would not be symbolic. It would blind Kaliningrad's defenses. Suicide drones, each equipped with jammers and guided bombs, would saturate the skies, flooding Russian radar with false targets. Behind them would come the Steel Hammer, F-22 Raptors, and F-15 EX Eagles, loaded with precision ordnance to punch holes through the fortress. And if Russia still resisted, the final blow would come from offshore. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched in rapid succession, each carrying nearly half a ton of explosives. No one in the Situation Room voiced hesitation. The message was already clear. Russia had gambled by pulling the trigger, and now the world's most powerful military machine was turning to face them. 3:30 p.m. Baltic time. The gray skies above the sea trembled as the first wave of America's retaliation lifted off. From the vast deck of the USS Gerald R Ford, 68 unmanned suicide drones rose into the air, one after another, their wings catching the fading light of the afternoon sun. Engines screamed as they climbed into formation, each drone carrying a 200-pound payload of precision explosives and pods designed to scramble enemy radar. Together, they spread out into wide arcs, forming a swarm that stretched for miles across the horizon. To the sailors watching from the carrier's deck, it looked like an entire flock of metallic birds surging eastward. Every one of them programmed to punch a hole into Russia's defenses. Minutes later, the second wave followed, the steel spearhead. 15 F-22 Raptors and 10 F-15 EX Eagles roared into the sky, climbing fast until they disappeared into the gray Baltic clouds. Loaded with JDAM smart bombs and long-range air-to-air missiles, their flight paths carved sharp lines across the sky. The sound of their engines rumbled back toward the Gerald R Ford, a low thunder that rolled over the sea. Below deck, crews listened on comms, knowing each second carried the weight of history. Everyone understood what was at stake. One mistake could turn a clash into a full-scale war. Inside Kaliningrad, Russian radar operators sat frozen as their consoles flared with activity. Green screens that had been quiet hours earlier now pulsed with hundreds of fast-moving signatures. To their eyes, it looked like the sky itself had turned into an enemy. The American drones were flooding the spectrum, injecting false echoes, ghost context that made it nearly impossible to tell what was real. For a moment, the Russian defense grid went blind. Silence filled the command bunker. Then, suddenly, secondary systems kicked in. Emergency radars flickered to life, and the screens lit up again. The illusion collapsed. Targets were locked. A salvo of surface-to-air missiles ripped through the haze, twisting upward in tight spirals. Their exhaust trails carved white scars against the sky. Seconds later, explosions erupted among the swarm. 12 American drones were torn apart in midair, fragments raining into the sea in showers of fire. One crippled drone spun out of control, nearly colliding with a formation of raptors, before an escorting eagle opened fire and vaporized it. For a heartbeat, chaos threatened to unravel the strike package, but the swarm pressed on. The surviving drones reorganized, splitting into 3 attack groups that dove headlong toward their program targets: radar arrays, missile launchers, and fuel depots. At 3:43 p.m., the first strike connected. A drone slammed directly into an S-400 launcher, the explosion shaking the earth and sending a column of black smoke curling skyward. Secondary blasts followed instantly as fuel trucks and ammunition caches ignited, each fireball larger than the last. The Raptors seized the moment. Flying in pairs, they dropped from high altitude into surgical attack runs, releasing precision bombs with pinpoint accuracy. One $300 million radar dome disappeared in a single blinding flash, its protective concrete base shattered into fragments. A reinforced command bunker cracked open like a hollow shell, flames spilling from its ruptured walls. Russian defenders fought back with everything left at their disposal. Autocannons roared, tracer rounds slicing jagged lines through the clouds. A cluster of drones was shredded mid-dive, but the Eagles answered back. One pilot released a GBU-39 small-diameter bomb, and in a single flash, an entire gun crew was silenced. By 3:50 p.m., the battlefield above Kaliningrad had become a storm of steel and fire. Smoke trails crisscrossed the horizon, drones streaked downward in kamikaze dives, and shockwaves rippled over the Baltic. The Americans had lost 17 drones, but in exchange, 7 major air defense positions were gone. Kaliningrad, the fortress once thought impenetrable, was bleeding, and this was only the first phase of the assault. 3:51 p.m. Baltic skies. Kaliningrad's defenses were battered, but not broken. Deep inside hardened bunkers, Russian commanders barked new orders. Surviving S-300 and Pantsir systems swiveled upward, their launch tubes rising like steel spears. Within moments, 22 surface-to-air missiles blasted skyward, their contrails twisting into the clouds. The American strike force braced for impact. Drones scattered, trying to soak up the fire, but the Raptors and Eagles had no such shield. At 3:53 p.m., a thunderous explosion split the air. An F-15EX Eagle II, worth nearly $90 million, took a direct hit. The jet disintegrated midair, flaming debris raining into the Baltic. Both pilots ejected, but their parachutes burned before they could open. Over comms, a chilling call crackled. Eagle down, Eagle down. Seconds later, shrapnel ripped through an F-22 Raptor's engine housing. Warning lights flared red across the cockpit. Smoke trailed behind the jet as its pilot fought desperately to keep control, limping back toward international waters. The world's most advanced fighter had been reduced to a crippled survivor. For a moment, the balance shifted. American commanders faced their nightmare, overwhelming Russian fire threatening to undo their gains. Raptors evaded radar locks with stealth and speed, but the heavier Eagles fought under relentless fire. Losses mounted. Then came the counterpunch. At 3:58 p.m., 110 miles offshore, the USS Thomas Hudner received coordinates of Russia's command hub. Its vertical launch cells opened, and with a deafening roar, 20 Tomahawk cruise missiles leapt into the sky. flying low and fast, hugging the terrain at 550 miles per hour. They sped toward Kaliningrad. Russian radars scrambled, but many were already crippled. At 4:02 p.m., the first Tomahawk struck a reinforced bunker, lifting a steel blast door into the air like paper. Seconds later, another missile tore into a command post, killing dozens of Russian officers instantly. Each strike was precise, brutal, and unrelenting. A radar dome worth hundreds of millions evaporated in a single blast. An ammunition depot went up in flames, the chain reaction shaking buildings miles away. Black smoke curled into the sky, flames leaping 300 feet high. By 4:07 p.m., Russia's command network was collapsing. Senior officers were dead or missing. Communication lines dissolved into static. The fortress Moscow once called untouchable was cracking open, but the cost was undeniable. 2 American fighters gone, 2 pilots lost in flames. For the sailors aboard the Gerald R Ford, victory felt heavy. The battle wasn't over, and the decisive blow was still to come. 4:30 p.m., August 18th, 2025. The firestorm over Kaliningrad reached its climax. What had once been the pride of Russia's western defenses was now a battlefield of smoke and rubble. Satellite feeds streamed into the Pentagon, showing plumes of fire rising miles high. Nearly 3/4 of Kaliningrad's air defense grid had been obliterated in under an hour. Intelligence intercepts painted the scale of the disaster. At least 47 Russian officers were confirmed dead, including 3 generals and 9 senior colonels. More than 400 soldiers lay dead or wounded. Ammunition depots that had taken a decade to stockpile erupted in minutes, their destruction valued at over $6 billion in losses. Convoys of troops fled inland, abandoning positions they once called untouchable. Families evacuated coastal villages, convinced more strikes were coming. By evening, only 1 radar site remained partially functional, running on emergency power. It couldn't track stealth aircraft. The so-called impenetrable fortress of Kaliningrad was silent. On the decks of the USS Gerald R Ford, sailors stared east. The cost of victory hung heavy. 2 fighters gone, 2 pilots lost forever. Their sacrifice burned into the memory of every man and woman who had watched them fall. And yet, their mission had succeeded. America hadn't only avenged its downed F-35, it had shattered Russia's entire Baltic shield. For Washington, the message was unmistakable. When American blood is spilled, the answer will not come in words, but in fire. For Moscow, the lesson was devastating. Strike a U.S. aircraft, and the price is annihilation. The shock rippled far beyond the Baltic. NATO allies, watching the scale of destruction, saw proof of America's resolve. Enemies saw a warning written in ruins. Kaliningrad, long considered a symbol of Russian dominance, had been erased in less than 47 minutes. But victory carried weight. The loss of 2 U.S. pilots reminded the world that behind every show of force lies human sacrifice. Steel and fire may win battles, but it is lives that write history. By nightfall, the world had changed. A drone strike on a single F-35 had spiraled into catastrophe for Moscow, and for America, it became a demonstration of power no adversary could ignore. Betrayal, miscalculation, or a deliberate act of aggression. August 18th proved how fast the world can change in minutes. A single drone strike on an American F-35 ignited a chain of destruction that left Kaliningrad in ruins, hundreds of Russian casualties, and 2 brave American pilots lost in the flames. The balance of power in Europe shifted that day. Moscow's pride, its so-called shield in the West, was shattered in less than an hour. And the world saw the true cost of striking at American forces. The battlefield itself can disappear. Yet for all the steel, fire, and precision weapons, one truth remains. Wars are decided not only by machines, but by the men and women who step into the cockpit, onto the deck, and into harm's way. Their sacrifice is what turns strategy into history. And now, the question is yours. Was this Russia's tragic mistake, or the spark of something far larger? If you want more breakdowns of events that shape the future of global conflict, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment on where in the world you're watching from. Your support means everything, and it ensures we can keep bringing you the stories others won't.